Alright y'all, today we're back with the Baldur's Gate 3 video. It's going to be a little bit different this time around. We're going to be doing a tier list ranking all the cantrips in the game. There are 22 of them, so we're going to try to move a little bit quick when ranking them. And as you can tell probably from my voice, I am still sick, so I apologize for that. Now this is going to be a more relaxed, laid back video, but just like in my build videos, this is really just to open up discussion about the game. My tier list is not going to be the same as other people's tier list because it really depends on your playstyle, how often you use these cantrips, and how viable and how well do they mesh with the builds you're running with. But as always, I am up for people disagreeing with me. Maybe if I rank one of your cantrips that you really like and find use in and I put it in low, feel free to drop a comment on how to, I guess, use that cantrip effectively, or like what builds you think it really meshes well with that would kind of elevate it in a tier list. I'm completely open to that, and I highly encourage it. But without further ado, let's get into the cantrip list here. Hopefully I can get this done in one coffee. Probably not, but we're going to try. Now, the first cantrip on the list is Acid Splash. This does a small little AoE. They have to do a dexterity saving throw, and it does a 1d6 acid damage. Now, all the cantrips that do damage, they usually get an additional dice with at level 5 and 10, I believe. So when I say 1d6, I'm talking about just the base level 1 version of it. But it does that small little AoE. The only thing about this cantrip that kind of stinks is the fact that there's a lot of things in BG3 that are resistant to acid damage. And then it also comes down to how often do I actually use this cantrip. And the honest answer is not very often. I don't find a lot of builds that should run this cantrip in general. That dexterity saving throw, a lot of enemies also have pretty decent to high dexterity. Now, with all that being said, I am going to stick it into B tier because it does that little AoE damage that can be really helpful to use if you need that. Now, where I place it from left to right does matter. So I think this is going to be a very low B tier to a kind of high C tier, I could see. And then next up, we're going to talk about Blade Ward. Now, this is an interesting one because I never use Blade Ward as a cantrip. Now, in BG3, Blade Ward is an effect. So the effect, it halves bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. That effect you can get in a multitude of ways in the game through items or an additional effect of like if you heal a target that also grants them Blade Ward. But the actual cantrip itself, I never use. It only lasts for 2 turns. It costs an action. It's just I would rather do a list of cantrips before using Blade Ward. So for me, I think it has to sit in either very, very low C tier or D tier. I'm gonna put it in very low C tier because I could see using it sometimes. It can be helpful, especially maybe in the early game, but yeah. This one's a little bit of a tough one to rank. There's probably a lot of discussion around Blade Ward, so I look forward to reading about that. And then next up we have Bone Chill. Bone Chill's pretty good overall. Got that 18 meters, does that 1d8 necrotic damage. That obviously it scales up. It also prevents the target from healing, and then I think it gives undead creatures disadvantage on attack rolls. Bone Chill's really good, especially if you're running like I'd say like a necromancer or like kind of like a dark build, undead sort of build. I'm gonna put it in B tier, but it kind of suffers from the same thing as Acid Spray, where there's a fair bit of enemies that do resist or are immune to necrotic damage, so that kind of hurts it a little bit. But overall, I do think Bone Chill is a really good, useful cantrip overall. And next up, we have our first, I'd say D tier, that I do not use and I do not recommend, and then it's Dancing Light. So this will just light up an area. It lasts for 10 turns. Problem is, it's an action, and it's also a concentration. And most of the times you're going to want to light up an area, it's going to be in combat. And there's another cantrip that'll do this job, but it will have so much less of an investment than using a concentration just to light up an area. So unfortunately, yeah, I never use Dancing Light. I think it's actually kind of a trap cantrip to use. But yeah, I do not recommend it. So that's why it's going to stay in D tier for me. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, that was our first D tier, we're going to talk about Eldritch Blast. This is going into S tier. This cantrip probably does the most damage, and when you pair it with a warlock and how they can modify it, where they can push people with it, You can add your charisma modifier to it to do additional damage. The fact that you can select targets and the way it scales. Yes, Eldritch Blast is amazing. Full builds can be built around Eldritch Blast. Again, these are cantrips. They don't cost a spell slot. It's just an action usually. And so, yeah, and that force damage as well. Not a lot of things are resistant to force damage. This is just Eldritch Blast it's so damn good. I think on everybody's tier list for Eldritch Blast, it's got to sit in S tier, right? And then moving on, we can kind of talk about maybe a little bit of a competitor to Eldritch Blast, which is Firebolt. Firebolt I use all the time, especially if I'm running a like fire sorcerer, or even if I'm not. It's just a really solid just cantrip for damage. That 1d10 fire damage, and obviously it scales up. There's a lot of things fire, reacts with very well, like smoke powder or oil. So there's a lot of setup you can do to make Firebolt just that much better. And I use it the entire time in the game from Act 1, 2, and 3. And so for me, it's got to sit in A tier, and the damage is really good on it. Yeah, Firebolt, again, I use it all the time. It's always useful. So that's why it's going to sit in A tier for me. Now, really quick, the difference between Firebolt and Bone Chill for me is the fact that I just find more uses out of Firebolt. Now, there's a fair bit of enemies that are resistant and immune to fire, but I just think the interaction with usually environments and just how, I would say, versatile Firebolt is, that's why it kind of edges out Bone Chill by just a little bit. But if you are somebody who likes to play more like that necromancy, undead style, then I could definitely see you swapping these two or putting them alongside each other. But again, this is just how I rank them. So next up is Friends. This is more of a utility one. This will give you advantage on charisma checks. This is pretty decent. I'm going to put it in B tier. If you are the face of a party, this is a very helpful cantrip overall. Not all of BG3 is combat related. There is a lot of utility. In fact, that you're talking to characters, and that'll get you out of most combat encounters, really, essentially. A lot of this game doesn't have to be combat. So if you are somebody who is not focused on combat, Friends is a very good pick. I could see you probably putting it in A tier if that's the way you like to play. I do think it's better than Acid Spray, but I'm going to stick it in. This is probably going to end up being in like high to mid B tier. I think it's really good. And obviously if you're not on that combat focus, you could probably put it in A tier. But for me, it's sitting in good. It's sitting in B tier for me. And then next up we have my favorite utility, and that is Guidance. So this will give you a 1d4 on every ability check. It is a concentration, so you got to be careful with it, just like how you have to be careful with Friends as well. As far as like if you are going into a conversation and you say preemptively cast haste on your characters, if your character then casts Guidance, well, then that haste goes off those characters. They become lethargic, and at the start of the combat, you're kind of like, you're already on the back foot, essentially. That happened to me recently, and it's kind of a bonehead maneuver, so you just keep that in mind. But Guidance overall, S tier for me. I use it all the time throughout the game. It's always a top tier pick. It's a great utility pick. It's just, yes, Guidance is so freaking good. The fact that you use it for so many things in this game. I would find it hard to argue how Guidance is not definitely like at the top of everybody's tier list, essentially. So yes, really, really good pick with Guidance there. And now moving on to Light. So this is the cantrip that I was talking about before that does Dancing Light's job better because it's not a concentration. It'll last until long rest or until you recast it. You can just cast it on an object and it just emits light. Really simple, really useful in Act 2 especially, but it just does Dancing Light's job I think just so much better. So that's why it's going to sit in B tier. Now, admittedly, you don't use it all that often, but because Act 2 is the shortest part of the game, maybe you could put this in C tier as niche, but I'm going to stick it in B tier, probably low end B tier. It's a great, again, utility option for Act 2 especially, or if you need to, say, have an illuminated target with like the Callous Glow Ring, where you get that 2 extra damage if something is illuminated, then Light really pairs well with that. So it's going to sit in probably low end B tier for me. And then we have a utility and also combat cantrip here, and that's Mage Hand. Mage Hand goes into A tier. There's so many uses for a Mage Hand for like, pickpocketing, doing things from afar, swapping spots for a certain genie lamp. What else? Oh, early game, really, really helpful to cast Mage Hand, drop some bottles of water, have the Mage Hand, throw the bottles of water and then use either cold or lightning spells, and you don't have to waste a turn on that. So Mage Hand is really good. You gotta be a little bit careful in combat because they don't have much health, but the overall use throughout the game it's undeniable. So Mage Hand, yeah, it's got to sit in A tier. And then we have Minor Illusion as well. Now, I'm going to stick this in B tier. That might be a little, people might be like, you know, raising their eyebrow up at that one, but it's because I don't use Minor Illusion as much as I use, say, Mage Hand. But I understand the value in Minor Illusion, the fact that it distracts enemies and it'll basically make people go investigate an area. And that can be amazing for certain playstyles. But it's not how I play the game usually. Usually I'm a little more bullish, essentially, just rushing in there. I don't like to do too much of that kind of manipulating NPCs like that, like drawing them away. Again, I just like to just usually get in there. So I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it sits really high in B tier. Again, I could see a lot of people making a case for this being A tier, but that's their list. This is my list, and I don't use it as much as, say, like I said earlier, Mage Hand. And next up we have Poison Spray. So Poison Spray, I don't think it's very good. It's melee. It's got that poison damage. It does a lot of poison damage, a 1d12, but melee damage. A lot of things are resistant to poison. I really don't find many uses out of it, and I would rather use Acid Spray just because that range. I don't want to be in melee range essentially most of the time. So I could see, I don't know. You guys tell me about this one. You have to do a Constitution saving throw with Poison Spray, and I think that hurts it as well because a lot of targets have pretty decent Constitution. So yeah, Poison Spray. I think it's a very niche cantrip to use. And another niche, I would say, cantrip to use is Produce Flame. I only use this in the beginning of the game, and I only use it on Shadowheart because Shadowheart, before you respec her, you know, you're very limited on basically cantrip, because if you try to use Firebolt, she has like low intelligence, and it doesn't, that cantrip doesn't scale well as far as its hit chance. So what you actually want to do is use Produce Flame and then throw it for that fire damage. And it does emit a light, so it kind of got like a little bit of like a dual functionality, but like it's not great. And then again, once you respec, this cantrip, it completely like falls off for me. So I think I am going to stick it in C tier, because again, it's a very niche use for me in my playthroughs. I could see you maybe wanting to use it as like a light source, but we have light. It's kind of like maybe like a better light. So okay, I'll stick it in B tier. Maybe I should move light down to C tier. I don't know. I'm going to swap them around like this because I think it is a little bit of a better cantrip than light, you know, now that we're talking about it out loud, but we might come back to that one. Let's just stick it there for now, and then we'll come back to it later. And moving on to Ray of Frost. This also goes into A tier. So it sits in A tier, and I think it edges out Firebolt just a little bit. And honestly, it's going to be a lot of recency bias because I just did an honor mode with Frost Mage, and this cantrip was hitting for over 80 damage, which was very nutty. And on top of that, there's a lot of equipment that will give you effects like it'll freeze the ground under them. There's a chance it'll chill them. And then when you hit a target that's already wet, it can freeze them. So a lot of recency bias with Ray of Frost, and it's such a good spell. It hurts the target's movement speed as well. So a little bit of an additional effect. It doesn't do as much damage as Firebolt, but I think these two are pretty interchangeable. I don't think there's much discussion about that. I think it depends on what build you're running with, but both of those I think can be flip-flopped, both very useful. So strong A tier for that one. It's useful throughout the game, especially if you build into it. Well, gee there, Nomad, if you build into any of these cantrips, they're going to be more useful. Yeah, I know. Okay, I get it, but I really like Ray of Frost, okay? And then there's Resistance, which is more like a utility type pick. It'll give you a 1d4 saving throw. I'm going to put it in C tier just because I don't actually cast this very often. You know, half my playthroughs, I have a paladin who has their aura, so it kind of does that same job for free. Yeah, I do use it probably more than Blade Ward, so admittedly. So I'm going to put it in C tier. I'm going to stick it, yeah, somewhere probably, I could see it as like high C tier. I don't know how many people are really using Resistance all the time throughout the game. It pops up every now and then, but just definitely not all that often. So it's going to stick in C tier for me. And it's also a concentration, so there is that. And then we have Sacred Flame here. I'm kind of conflicted about this one as well because only use it in the early game, and when I do use it, it never feels fantastic. And then also once I respec, this thing goes immediately off my bar. I'm probably gonna stick it in low B tier, high C tier. I'm gonna stick it in C tier. I don't think Sacred Flame's all that good. All right, then moving on to Shillelagh, by the way, second cup here, had to go get that. This is a pretty good cantrip for druids. I think they're probably the only ones that are gonna get like a lot of great use out of this. Things it has going for it: bonus action, so you don't, not a regular action, and then it transforms your club or your staff, to, the 1d8, and then it adds your wisdom modifier to the damage. So that's pretty good. I'm gonna stick it in B tier. I think it's really solid. Kind of a utility, kind of a setup type of cantrip here, but you can also use it in combat or early because it's that bonus action. So I think pretty decent good overall. So it's gonna sit in B tier for me. And then next up we have Shocking Grasp. This is gonna sit in probably top of the B tier for me. I use this a lot, especially for lightning builds. I think it goes next to Bone Chill. Probably Bone Chill is actually a little bit better. I don't know. These two I think are pretty interchangeable, but I'll leave it there for now. The reason why I like Shocking Grasp so much is for just the lightning synergy. And again, having wet targets, and then that'll do double damage. The only negative about it is the fact that it is melee, but if you're something like a Lightning Fist Monk, then this would probably be an A tier for you, essentially. So that's how I could see it being a little bit higher. But for me, I'm gonna keep it in B tier for now. High B tier, by the way, high B tier. And then next up we have Thaumaturgy. Now this one gives you advantage on intimidation, and that can be helpful. I'm gonna stick it with resistance. I find resistance probably a little bit more useful, or at least it comes up more. And then yeah, Thaumaturgy, I do find it more niche. This and like resistance, I don't have it come up too often where I'm using them. They are useful. Again, C tier, niche. I think they're very niche, so I'm gonna keep them there. And then next up we have Thorn Whip. Ugh, man. So 1d8 piercing damage. It does skill up. Does an attack roll, 9 meters, and then it can do that pull effect. I want Thorn Whip to be so much better than what it is. It's hard to really justify using Thorn Whip all that often. It's very situational. It is a niche pick. I'm gonna put it in C tier, I think. It's just, man, I love the idea of, a whip in this game. It's just Thorn Whip, it ain't it, chief. So I think I'm gonna stick it in. It's gonna stick in C tier. It's just a matter of when, or I guess where exactly. Man, I can even see some people putting it in D tiers and never use it. I could see that with also Sacred Flame as well. But I think these two kind of just pair together as far as like, not going to be using them very often, essentially. And speaking of something that belongs in D tier, True Strike. This is a concentration. It's an action, and it'll give you advantage on attacks. So True Strike, why does this thing sit into D tier? Well, it's because it's a concentration. It does give you advantage on attacks, but it's like a setup like utility spell, but there's so many other better like utility options, or I guess support options, than True Strike. It's just, True Strike's just not very good. This is definitely a trap because it sounds good on paper, but in actuality, in practice, no, don't use True Strike. Just use anything other than True Strike, and it only lasts for 2 turns as well. Not a great cantrip. Now, Vicious Mockery. This is an okay one. I like Vicious Mockery sometimes. Man, I could see putting this one in very low B tier, or maybe even C tier. I don't use Vicious Mockery all that much. I think I am going to stick it into like high C tier. So Vicious Mockery, it does have that additional effect of it'll give a target disadvantage on their next attack roll. It's just the damage that it comes with, and then how it scales. It's just not as good as everything above it. Is really the way to judge it. That additional effect it's okay, but I would just rather use any of these other cantrips essentially. And I think that's really the breakdown for this list as far as my cantrips is how often am I using all of these. And I think I'm pretty happy with this list overall, because obviously Eldritch Blast, amazing. Guidance Air, use it all the time. Ray of Frost, Frostbolt, those are my other 2 like favorite damage types. I could see Bone Chill and Shocking Grasp going up there. I feel like when it comes down to, I guess, those 4, so Ray of Frost, Frostbolt, Bone Chill, and Shocking Grasp, when it comes down to those, those are really very situational. You know, I could make a build or do a playthrough where I end up using these two a lot more than these two, and in that case they would flip-flop. So maybe these do belong in A tier. It's just, but as of right now, it really just depends on how I'm playing the game at the moment for those, because I don't want to bloat A tier. Because man, looking at these now, I should probably move these three. So Minor Illusion, Bone Chill, and Shocking Grasp. I should probably move these up to A tier. I think I put them down there in B tier before, and that was just strictly based on my most recent runs and how often I was using these, which I wasn't using these all that often, obviously, but that could change by my next playthrough when I build like a little bit more around, you know, what these effects like the necrotic damage or the lightning damage. So definitely, I think they probably could just sit in A tier. Yeah, I'm definitely happy with that. Especially the same thing with Minor Illusion, as far as like it just again depends on the playthrough, and you could definitely just get a lot of use out of Minor Illusion. I'm pretty happy with the order here. This definitely is reflecting how I kind of like feel about each one of them. And yeah, there's a little bit of wiggle room where I could be swayed with like maybe bumping a few of these up or, you know, a few of these down, but I think it's pretty solid. So yeah, that's the list. Let me know what you guys think. You know, obviously feel free to disagree. Let me know some different play styles with maybe one of these cantrips that I didn't rank so high, like how it could elevate it. But yeah, I will probably have a build out tomorrow to kind of keep that, you know, that ball rolling as well. So if you made it this far, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace and take care.